Okay, welcome back to this week's episode of Women's Wellness, Wisdom, Hormones, and Beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Jenny, and I'm here with our co host, Adrienne. And today, we're here to talk about something near and dear to my heart and Adrienne's heart, talking about breath work. But before we get there and talk about what does that mean and kind of how do you use it, very nebulous term, let's talk about why that's important. So, Adrienne, I know you've had some background in this, done some research in this yourself. Tell me a little bit about what you think about when you think about like breath work and what that means or where we start from.
Yeah, breathwork, it's so funny. As a pediatric OT and a functional medicine practitioner, it was something until I really dove into, I thought was, I take some deep breaths. And honestly, if someone told me to take some deep breaths, I probably would have raised my cortisol even more. But as I started to gain an understanding about our vagus nerve, which I know you'll dive into here some too, and even just co-regulation with children, it's really one of the greatest tools we have. In fact, I would say when I work with kids and families, it is the cheapest tool we have, in addition to one of the most impactful tools and accessible, meaning we can do it anytime. And so, what changed my perspective on this was when I understood that we are literally resetting our nervous system by taking a deep breath, which will hit our vagus nerve and trigger a relaxation response. Um, and so that's kind of where my passion for this shifted, and I've really started to implement it in my practice with both kids, myself, and women. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So taking a step back, because you mentioned the vagus nerve, and as a neuro PT, nerd out on this stuff, right? So our vagus nerve, if you're not familiar, is the nerve that's responsible for digestion, breathing. It runs along your neck and down into your stomach. And so there's a lot of different places along the way that we can hit, but it's responsible for so much of that regulation piece. And so in the recent years, there's been a ton of gadgets out there and that claim to, and some do, reset your nervous system, stimulate your vagus nerve, all of those things. But the reality is, when we breathe, and specifically when we practice breath work, we can influence that vagus nerve and therefore influence that sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. And so what does that mean? Well, parasympathetic is that rest and digest. It's the relaxation response. It's the negative side, right? Or the relaxation side of our nervous system. Whereas our sympathetic response is that stimulation, activation, readiness. And we run so much of our day there, right? As humans nowadays in particular, we're constantly stimulated, whether that's technology, people, we're just never really off. That we tend to run with stimulation up here for our sympathetic nervous system and therefore inversely have not enough parasympathetic stimulation. So what we see with GAP then oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's almost really cool because like as you describe it, I think like, oh, we're in that heightened state. We all just wish we had our reset button, right? And you're
Yeah.
kind of describing our reset button.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that I love so much when you came on with us because you had such experience in this, but like, how do we know, right? And so one of the tools we know kind of measures that, correlates with it is our heart rate variability. And so a lot of people think, me, I don't even know what that means, right? Like, that's not my heart rate. Oh, and don't I want, what's going on here, right? And so we actually want higher heart rate variability. What that means is the variability between the heartbeats, right? So not how many beats do you have, but how there should be some asymmetry or variability between those. And the higher the number, generally speaking, the better the regulation of our sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. So, Adrienne, you have some experience with this from grad school. So, what did you see? What populations were you looking at? And kind of what did you notice about heart rate variability?
Yeah. So heart rate variability is really cool. It's kind of like a measure of our body's resilience, right? And so I had some experience. We are specifically were looking at students with high functioning autism and fitness rates and their regulation. Which if you've ever worked with kids with autism or you have a child with autism, sometimes regulation doesn't come as easily. But we're looking at how breath work and breathing could help tie in the heart rate variability. So like Jenny said, this really excites me because it's really like when we're looking at the tool to help different populations and ourselves, this is something that's almost like a bio, right? So
Yeah.
we're looking to increase our heart rate variability, and uh, we can do that with breath work. You can do it also with physical fitness and things like that as well, which I also had the privilege to look at some in grad school, but for the purpose of breath work and resetting our nervous system is one of the key factors in impacting heart rate variability. And heart rate variability really impacts our overall health too, like our digestion, our cardiovascular health, and things like that that will carry through the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And immune system is another one I would add to
Yes.
that, right? Yeah. So that's how we measure it, right? So if you're wondering, okay, well, do I know if I'm dysregulated in this or not? Those numbers can be a good tool. And like we know, like Adrienne mentioned, certain populations tend to have lower numbers. Certain medications will lower those numbers.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things that can impact that. But one thing we know is that breath work in almost all of those situations to increase it. And so what does that look like? 'Cause I think a lot of people think, oh yeah, I'm breathing. Like Adrienne said, yep, fine, right? But breath work is the intentional breathing, right? Breathing deep, stimulating that vagus nerve through very specific tools in breathing to ensure that we're activating that vagal nerve and thus the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I think, how we implement this depends on the individual. It doesn't always have to be laying down with your eyes closed, although sometimes I do like to do episodes like that as well. But one of my favorite tools, honestly, has been because I'm a busy mom myself, practicing the pause and taking that opportunity to do 2 minute cycle of breath work. Um, wherever, right? And so I have used this at various points in my life, usually when I'm busier, but an opportunity when I shut the car off to sit and breathe. And what that looks like for me in that moment is making sure that I'm getting those nice deep abdominal belly breaths, right? So hands on my stomach, in through my nose, down, making sure my stomach is expanding, not my chest rising, and then letting that back out. So that can be a simple one strategy, right? And doing that for about 10 to 12 breaths or 2 minutes, depending how long it takes you as a tool to reset your nervous system throughout the day. So I think that's kind of a simple, easy way that you can apply that. And Adrienne, I don't know if you have a specific way that you love to do breath work as well, and we can talk about maybe a couple of other strategies too.
Well, what came to mind is I often do breath work with kids. And so one of the things I found to be really effective with children is the smell the flower, blow out the candle technique. But I also like
Mhm.
to cue them by touching their nose because they never, or having them touch their nose because it's hard to coordinate, right? To explain to a child, breathe in your nose and out your mouth. So oftentimes we'll practice smelling the flower and then pursing our lips to blow out the candle. And I'll usually do 5 breaths with a child. Sometimes 10 sounds too daunting.
Yeah. From an attention standpoint too.
Yeah. And I like to show my fingers as well. But if you have a
Yeah.
child, and even sometimes I find, again, I mentioned this earlier, but like I become dysregulated when working with a child. And my regulation is going to directly affect them. So maybe they might not be fully dysregulated, but I'm going to take flower breaths with them because I need to re regulate. So that's just a good tool. And sometimes that's a tool too with adults and children to do before you're dysregulated. If you know you're going into a stressful meeting or your child's going to have a test today or they're going to a therapy session that they're nervous about, maybe just helping reset that regulation before they go with a
Yeah.
technique like that.
Yeah, I love that. So, I mean, there's tons of different strategies out there. And, for today's purposes, we absolutely can't cover all of them. But I think the keys for both of what we just described is being able to get that deep breath into your belly, breathing in through your nose to
Mhm.
get that, the breathing out through pursed lips, or whether you're breathing out open mouth or through your nose. The other thing you can do is add sound to it, right? So that forced exhale also activates that parasympathetic nervous system. So that could look like in through the nose. Oh, right? A very loud or humming sound with that, to be able to get that activation even further and deeper. But I think the keys we both described, right, is that abdominal breathing, getting that deep breath into your abdomen, not into your upper chest, but really to all the way down to stimulate that vagus nerve. Focusing on your breathing. So for kids, whether that's a cue like a finger on the nose or the 5 fingers to look at, but not letting your mind necessarily be on everything else while you're trying to breathe. Let's focus on the breathing. And if you drift away, that's absolutely okay. Let those thoughts go and then come back to your breathing. But just eliminating everything else except your breathing as you're focusing on that. And all it takes is that 5 breaths, 10 breaths, whatever it is, to start to shift that nervous system. So we go from stimulated, overstimulated to bringing it down here to this becoming more of our norm and our baseline again. If you're doing it that way, what you will see is those increases in heart rate variability over time. And so I can tell you when I watch my scores and my sleep that I can see the difference noticeably in what's happening in my heart rate variability when I am doing my breath work, when I am regulated versus when I am not. Um,
And I think, right, this is something that as you practice and incorporate in your everyday routine, one, your baseline for regulation will become lower and you'll be more regulated. But two, it just becomes more natural throughout your day. So for the first
yeah,
week, or if you set a goal for it to do it 3 times a day for a week, you'll start to notice that it becomes more natural. I feel like when you first start breath work, it's one of those things where you're like, I one can't tell a difference, and two, it feels inconvenient to my day, but really just commit for that week and see what it does for you because I think it'd make a huge difference.
I love that. And you touched on this a little bit, but the other place you can use this once you feel comfortable and have confidence in your own skill is carrying that over into regulating with your kids or with your spouse, right? And using breath work as a space and a place for them to help start regulating as well. And so that's something I use with my 5-year-old. And it's not always a conscious, breathing through your nose, 5 fingers. Sometimes it's just holding him and giving him a hug when he's upset and exaggerating my own breath as I'm working on helping him get his regulated as well. So I think, using that tool for yourself, but also for your relationships can be very beneficial.
And to your point, it might not even be implementing it with your child or your husband, but when people see you stop, breathe, and calm down, it's something that sometimes other people do unintentionally as well too.
Sure.
So
Sure.
just taking that moment to reset, especially children, they see you do it. And if they see you regulating your nervous system when you're upset about something that's totally unrelated to them, it might be a tool that they pick up and put in their toolbox for later on.
Absolutely. So as we leave for today, my challenge for you is to implement, like Adrienne said, 3 times this week. Practice pause, practice your breath work, give it 2 minutes at the most as a tool to get started. Really think about and feel what that feels like in your body, how that changes. If you use any sort of health tracker, watch your scores, see how those change. And then figure out what those next steps are. If this seems meaningful to you and it feels like a big change, then it might be something to look into further and dive into further as you work on your health journey as well. All right. Well, that's all for today. Thank you guys again, and we'll see you next time.
We did.